Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the ACAD Reader's Briefing, the podcast that turns a full issue of a major scientific journal into a focused 30 to 60-minute audio briefing. Today, we are bringing you a reader's guide to the August 6th, 2026 issue of Science. The cover brings us face to face with an American bison. Its dark forehead hair, curved horns, and tawny shoulders fill almost the entire frame, while only soft woodland and grasses remain in the background. On the right are three simple words: let them roam. The subtitle shifts the focus toward population structure. Understanding how different bison herds are connected can help conservation move beyond restoring numbers and toward restoring populations that can remain viable over the long term. American bison once numbered roughly 50 million across North America. After mass killing and habitat disruption, that population fell to only around 500 animals. Conservation and management eventually brought the total back to roughly 530,000. But numerical recovery did not mean that restoration was complete. Roads, fences, farmland, and protected area boundaries still separate many herds. The animals have returned. Their freedom to move has not fully returned with them. And when populations become isolated, gene flow is restricted as well. The cover therefore shifts the central conservation question. Not simply how many bison remain, but whether they can move, reconnect, and form population networks capable of adapting over the long term. From generative biological design and climate feedbacks to artificial intelligence governance, advanced materials, ecological restoration, and human evolution, this issue revolves around 5 major questions. First, when generative artificial intelligence can design complete viral genomes and even functioning bacteriophages, what kind of oversight should society build? These capabilities could accelerate therapeutic design, deepen research into viral mechanisms, and expand synthetic biology. But the same tools could also lower the technical barriers to creating dangerous biological systems. The difficult question is therefore not whether the technology should advance. It is how to support medical and scientific innovation while maintaining reliable boundaries against severe harm. Second, when Siberian fires, wetland methanogenesis, and permafrost thaw all strengthen methane emissions, how should global climate targets account for an expanding natural feedback? Human emissions remain the central driver of climate change. But as warming continues, some natural systems may begin releasing more greenhouse gases themselves. Fires alter ecosystems, wetlands emit methane, and thawing permafrost returns previously frozen carbon to active circulation. Future climate budgets may therefore need to account not only for what humans intentionally emit, but also for the additional emissions that warming itself can trigger. Third, as artificial intelligence enters national infrastructure, institutional workflows, and systems for evaluating research, how will sovereignty, measurement, and professional support be reorganized? Who controls the models? Who owns the data? Which metrics determine the value of research? And when more work can be generated, screened, or scored automatically, what role remains for human professionals? AI governance is therefore no longer simply a question of software procurement. It is becoming part of state capacity, organizational power, and career structure. Fourth, as quantum communication, lithium metal batteries, thermoelectric materials, room temperature magnetometry, and biomimetic materials advance, which structural designs will actually become stable devices? Material science repeatedly confronts the same challenge. A structure can deliver exceptional performance without remaining reliable over time. It may degrade, it may be difficult to manufacture, or it may lose its laboratory advantage when scaled into a real device. The most important advances, therefore, connect microscopic structure, interface control, defect management, and manufacturing into systems that remain stable under real operating conditions. Fifth, after species numbers recover, cellular mechanisms are identified, and ancient human genetics and brain evolution are reinterpreted, how can science connect local discoveries to longer-term frameworks for conservation, treatment, and cognition? Bison restoration shows that increasing numbers is not the same as restoring ecological function. Biomedical research shows that identifying a molecular mechanism is not the same as producing a mature therapy. And studies of human evolution repeatedly demonstrate that new evidence can overturn established ideas about ancestry, genetic exchange, and brain development. The harder task is to place individual discoveries inside much longer timescales. Taken together, this issue of science examines the responsibilities that emerge as scientific and technological power expands. Generative biological design gives researchers greater power to construct living systems while demanding stronger safeguards. Climate research shows that natural systems are not merely passive victims of warming. They can also amplify it through positive feedbacks. Artificial intelligence is moving into infrastructure and scientific institutions, turning a tool into part of organizational structure. Materials engineering reminds us that a breakthrough matters only if it survives the tests of stability, manufacturing, and long-term use. And research in ecology, biomedicine, and human evolution shows that local success cannot be understood without a longer historical frame. That brings us back to the bison on the cover. The old question was how to prevent a species from disappearing. The new question is how to give a recovered species enough space, connection, and freedom of movement to remain resilient. Numbers can be counted. Real recovery requires connection, and that may be the most important thread running through this issue. As scientific and technological capabilities continue to expand, we must ask not only what we can do, we must also ask which boundaries should remain, which connections must be restored, and which capacities must be protected for the long term. Next, we turn to the individual article briefings in this issue.
Section 1. Global Public Health, Biosafety, and Disease Control. This section brings together 10 pieces on artificial intelligence, designed viral genomes, bacteriophages generated with genome language models, weekly oral HIV treatment, new rules for risky pathogen research, dengue vaccine surveillance, Ebola monitoring gaps, and Candida auris colonization. It examines how public health can establish new boundaries across technological breakthroughs, treatment choices, outbreak surveillance, and biosafety rules. 1.1. AI-designed viral genomes. The question is no longer whether generative viral genome design will appear, but whether society can build an oversight system that allows the benefits of the technology to emerge while preventing serious harm. King and colleagues used generative artificial intelligence to design and synthesize complete functional viral genomes. These genomes were small, at about 5,400 base pairs, built on a well-studied template, and passed through both computational and experimental screening. Even so, the results showed that generative artificial intelligence can produce complete functional viral genomes. Researchers should not use these methods to generate pathogen genomes capable of infecting eukaryotes, because such genomes could encode new pathogens that existing countermeasures cannot control in humans, animals, or plants. Coding agents and cloud computing have lowered the barrier to fine-tuning, so excluding data is unlikely to remain a reliable safeguard. One study found that large language models outperformed as many as 94% of doctoral-level virologists on technical troubleshooting, which could increase the number of people able to assemble infectious viruses in laboratories. Existing governance is not sufficient for generative genomics because its genetic changes can be unpredictable. Oversight needs to enter the workflow early and be developed globally. Screening by nucleic acid synthesis providers should become a legal requirement, and methods able to recognize novel high-risk designs are urgently needed. 1.2. Generative design of bacteriophages with genome language models. The final result came from a cycle between models and experiments rather than from one algorithm alone. Phi-X174 was chosen as the template because its complete genome contains only about 5,400 bases. Yet it includes 11 genes, at least 7 regulatory elements, and 2 recognition sequences. Many coding regions overlap, so changing one position can affect several proteins and regulatory processes at once. The framework therefore had to examine genome length, coding architecture, host specificity, and replication sequences together. The process combined unsupervised pre-training of EVO1 and EVO2, task-specific fine-tuning on microvirus sequences, prompting with Phi-X174 sequences, and guidance from genome architecture and host range prediction tools. The models generated thousands of candidates, which were computationally filtered before nearly 300 genomes were synthesized and tested in cells. The 16 viable phages were not minor variants of one design. Their sequences placed components from distant evolutionary sources into new genomic contexts while preserving function. A mixture of naturally derived Phi-X174-like phages could not suppress resistant bacteria, whereas the generated phage mixture rapidly overcame resistance because its designs differed in host recognition and infectivity. 1.3. IA designs working bacteriophage genomes. The work showed that, with experimental screening, genome language models can coordinate an entire genetic structure. They learned evolutionary constraints that require many sequences to work together rather than isolated fragments. The dividing line in complete genome design was not the production of one more protein, but the ability to handle overlapping coding regions, regulatory elements, recognition sequences, and replication conditions at the same time. A change at any one position can affect several functions, so local correctness does not guarantee that the whole virus will survive. Biological design has therefore begun from parts to systems. The next question is whether this coordinated capability can expand reliably to larger genomes while experimental validation and safety boundaries remain inside the same workflow. 1.4. Weekly HIV pill moves closer, but vaccine studies face new questions. One of the most encouraging results at the conference came from studies indicating that one pill a week may be enough to control HIV in people living with the virus. A combination of lenacapavir and islatravir suppressed viral replication for 1 week. At the same time, a new combination of broadly neutralizing antibodies provided no protection against HIV infection. Whatever caused that disappointing outcome, the study showed that leading vaccine programs may need to refine their targets and identify new antibody combinations. A report from KFF and UNAIDS also showed that United States overseas HIV assistance fell from $8.3 billion in 2024 to $6.2 billion, a 25% cut. An AMFAR study found that about 1,700 HIV service sites closed across 46 countries after the cuts, with prevention hit hardest. Researchers said real-world resistance to these antibodies was stronger than they had understood. A network led by Larry Corey was testing a 3-antibody prevention mixture in 200 people. Vaccine research will continue, and Salim Abdul Karim argued that the failure could improve the chances of success in the next study. 1.5. New rules on risky biology studies get mixed reviews. Even scientists who support stronger oversight worried that the new policy was so vague that it might make funding decisions more confusing rather than clearer. It appeared to cover all pathogens instead of limiting regulation to a fixed list, such as agents with pandemic potential. Researchers and universities were required to identify work that might create biological agents capable of seriously harming humans or agriculture, and to assess risks and benefits before applying for federal support. The policy also barred government funding for 7 categories of dangerous gain-of-function research. It prohibited funding for emerging mirror-life research, which would use molecular building blocks of opposite-handedness to engineer organisms that could theoretically threaten all life on Earth. The rules also applied to projects already underway, with penalties that included withdrawal of federal funding and a 5-year ban on applying for new federal life science grants. Critics feared that vague language could obstruct work with almost no pathogenic risk. 40 projects suspended in the previous year were to remain paused, and some scientists were confused because several of those projects studied antibodies made against deadly viruses rather than pathogens themselves.
1.6. Dengue vaccines need long-term surveillance. For dengue, long-term surveillance is not an addition to vaccine policy. It is part of the intervention itself. On June 8th, Brazil temporarily halted the rollout of the Butantan dengue vaccine after rare and unexpected adverse events were reported early in deployment. Responding to the safety signal was appropriate, but the pause should not be read as a failure of dengue vaccination. Instead, it imposed a stricter scientific responsibility on vaccine deployment. Every rollout should include active pharmacovigilance, transparent reporting, and post-licensing studies that can distinguish vaccine-related events from severe dengue occurring after vaccination. The priority is not to abandon vaccination, but to monitor safety, effectiveness, and performance against different serotypes in real time. Protection and risk may vary with prior immunity, age, local transmission, and which of the 4 dengue serotypes is circulating. Evaluation, therefore, cannot stop at licensure. Vaccination should be linked from the beginning to active safety surveillance and serotype-specific epidemiological monitoring. Brazil's pause showed that safety signals can be detected and addressed, but also that these systems must be planned before rollout and assessed rapidly, transparently, and in the context of expected local population benefits. 1.7. Ebola raged below the radar for months, report says. The failure to raise an early alarm made the outbreak far harder to control. From mid-May to the time of reporting, officials had recorded 3,802 cases and 1,707 deaths, making it the second largest Ebola outbreak on record. Investigators concluded that the epidemic had appeared on the outskirts of Mongbolan in January and may have begun even earlier. By the time health authorities in distant Kinshasa recognized Ebola, a widespread epidemic was already underway. The team said all of the evidence pointed to extensive infection and identified more than 500 suspected cases between mid-January and May 15th. 13 frontline workers, including nurses, midwives, and Red Cross first responders, died, while 42 others became ill and recovered. Mongbualu's cemetery was overwhelmed, with as many as 20 burials in one day. A culture of secrecy delayed the alarm further. Many residents preferred private clinics because public hospitals were viewed as expensive and poor in quality, while private facilities feared blame, fines, or closure if they reported cases. Anonymous doctors alerted Doctors Without Borders in early May, but by then the outbreak had spread across Ituri province. 1 week later, the Democratic Republic of the Congo declared its 17th Ebola outbreak. 1.8. A fungus makes itself at home on skin. Intervening while Candida auris is still colonizing the skin may be one of the most effective ways to reduce later harm. Merrill and colleagues found that the fungus uses hair follicles as a protected niche and can persist without symptoms on mouse skin. It exposes chitin on its cell wall, alters the host immune response, and increases its persistence in tissue. Hair follicles extend into the dermis and protect microbes from washing and the shedding of dead skin. Candida auris attaches to hair shafts and remains inside follicles, colonizing intact skin. After reaching the skin, the fungus adheres to hair, strengthens interferon gamma signaling, and reshapes the local environment so that long-term persistence becomes easier than clearance. The findings pointed to possible targets for decolonization treatment.
Skin carriage is not harmless because colonized patients can spread the fungus, and colonization is one of the strongest risk factors for invasive infection. Exposed chitin and the type 1 immune circuit it stimulates may therefore become intervention targets, although researchers still need to determine whether those pathways can be manipulated safely. Interferon gamma can protect the host in deep skin and bloodstream infection, yet at the follicular surface it suppresses barrier programs driven by interleukin-17. The effect of the same cytokine depends on tissue location and pathogen state.
1.9. The fungal pathogen Candida auris exposes chitin to trigger interferon gamma and persist in hair follicles. Using mice with specific defects in cytokine signaling, the researchers confirmed that interferon gamma promotes the persistence of Candida auris in the epidermal niche while retaining its usual protective role during deeper skin or bloodstream infection. The fungus attached directly to hair and strongly preferred hair follicles. Interferon gamma signaled to follicular keratinocytes and reduced the expression of genes and programs driven by interleukin-17A. Under skin-like conditions, Candida auris remodeled its cell wall and increased surface exposure of chitin. These results linked fungal cell wall composition, the immune tone of the skin, and the outcome of colonization. In humans, skin colonization can last for months and raise the risk of bloodstream infection. But decolonization treatments aimed at chitin or the interferon gamma circuit still require safety testing and confirmation across different strains. 1.10. A path for fungal colonization. Hair follicles connect colonization with transmission. They protect the fungus from washing and skin shedding while allowing people without visible lesions to carry Candida auris for long periods. Quiet colonization of the skin is therefore not harmless. A colonized person can transfer the fungus to medical equipment, bed rails, and other patients, while stable storage in follicles makes routine cleaning unable to remove it completely. The central challenge is to disrupt this niche without damaging the normal skin barrier or protective immunity. Chitin exposure, local immune polarization, and the length of residence in follicles provide 3 directions for future decolonization research.
Section 2. Climate, Environment, Earth and Space Systems. This section covers rising Siberian methane, permafrost feedbacks, source control of plastics, early retirement of internal combustion vehicles, groundwater safety, space weather forecasts, hurricane seismoacoustics, and the Great Oxidation Event. It places climate feedback, pollution control, energy replacement, drinking water, space weather, and Earth history inside one environmental system. 2.1. Decadal doubling of Siberian methane emissions due to warming-induced fires and methanogenesis. Future methane reduction plans must include natural feedbacks at high latitudes, or some of the gains from lower human emissions could be canceled by rising northern emissions. Across 14 years, Siberian methane emissions increased by about 12 million tons, an average rise of roughly 5% a year. Emissions in 2020 and 2021 were more than twice the 2010 level. Eastern and Western Siberia followed different hydrological paths and produced methane through different mechanisms. The East became warmer and drier under high-pressure systems, strengthening fires and adding about 700,000 tons of fire-related methane each year. The West became wetter, creating more favorable oxygen-poor conditions for microbial methanogenesis and adding about 400,000 tons of wetland methane a year. The growth in Western methane was more closely related to wetting than to temperature alone, showing that hydrology determines whether warming becomes higher methane output. The upward trend remained even when exceptional fire years were treated separately. Under the existing warming path, added Siberian emissions could offset about 1/5 of the global methane reduction needed to meet climate goals, with Eastern Siberia expected to contribute the larger increase. Methane strengthens warming, and warming then promotes fires, permafrost thaw, wetland expansion, and further microbial methane production. The observations already show a persistent feedback, and Eastern and Western Siberia must be monitored as different systems by combining satellites, ground stations, aircraft, and process models. 2.2. The Permafrost Link. The Permafrost Link connects processes that unfold over different timescales. Frozen organic carbon re-enters the range of microbial activity after warming, fire, and hydrological change, then reaches the atmosphere as methane and strengthens warming in return. Natural feedbacks, therefore, cannot remain outside emissions accounting. Even if human methane emissions decline, rising high-latitude emissions could cancel part of the benefit and make established targets harder to reach. Permafrost is not a static carbon store. It is a dynamic system whose state changes with surface cover, water level, soil temperature, and fire history. Continuous observation is needed to identify when the feedback accelerates and which regions are becoming new sources. 2.3. Curb plastic pollution at its source. The authors argued that a global plastics treaty should place limits on virgin plastic production at its center. Policy should first reduce unnecessary plastic use, then expand reuse and refill systems, and only afterward manage waste that cannot be avoided. Recycling remains important, but it cannot replace reduction or justify unlimited growth in production. Global annual plastic output has doubled since 2000 to about 460 million tons, and roughly half become single-use products. Only about 9% is ultimately recycled, far less than the growth in new production. Source controls would therefore reduce not only marine waste, but also demand for fossil feedstocks and emissions from manufacturing. Once plastic has fragmented and dispersed, downstream cleanup cannot readily collect it again, which makes reduction before production irreplaceable. The authors also called for stronger producer responsibility. Manufacturers and brands should bear life cycle costs for collection, reuse, safe disposal, and environmental leakage. Product design should use fewer materials and hazardous additives, extend service life, and make repair, refilling, and reuse possible. 2.4. The climate benefits of retiring a fully operational internal combustion engine vehicle. Across most combinations of electric grids and vehicle types, replacing an internal combustion vehicle with a battery electric vehicle began to create a cumulative emissions advantage from the first day of the combustion vehicle's remaining life. Manufacturing the new vehicle created an initial carbon cost, but lower driving emissions gradually repaid it. Cleaner grids, more efficient electric vehicles, and higher annual mileage shortened the payback period, while replacing a less efficient old vehicle produced a larger gain. A combustion vehicle continues to accumulate direct emissions every kilometer, even when it remains mechanically sound. Manufacturing emissions occur once, while use phase emissions keep growing. Many electric replacement scenarios still reduce total emissions under unfavorable conditions, although the size of the benefit depended on the grid and vehicle combination. Policy should not require every car to be retired at once. It should prioritize the least fuel-efficient, highest mileage, and most polluting vehicles, including taxis, ride-hailing vehicles, delivery fleets, and public fleets. If an old car is merely sold to another household and remains on the road, global emissions have not disappeared. The full benefit occurs only when high-emitting vehicles are permanently retired, dismantled, or driven less. As the grid decarbonizes, the same electric vehicle becomes cleaner in later years, whereas a combustion vehicle cannot gain from that improvement. 2.5. Climate extremes expose groundwater risks. Climate extremes are exposing groundwater vulnerabilities that were previously hidden. As intense rainfall becomes more frequent, drinking water safety needs to move from occasional accident response toward advanced auditing, real-time monitoring, and rapid public health action. Heavy rain and flooding can carry contaminants quickly into groundwater. Cracked well casings, failed seals, karst channels, and soil fissures formed after drought can allow polluted floodwater to bypass slow filtration through soil and enter aquifers or private wells directly. After Hurricane Harvey, tests of 8,822 private wells found Escherichia coli at 2.8 times the normal baseline rate, showing that post-flood contamination was not a collection of isolated cases. Households relying on private wells do not have the continuous disinfection and routine monitoring of centralized systems, so contamination can create gastrointestinal risk through drinking and daily use. The authors called for vulnerable wells and high-risk aquifers to be mapped before extreme weather. Local agencies should review wellhead height, sealing, nearby septic systems, farms, and industrial sources, and establish networks able to sample rapidly before and after storms. Emergency response should begin before floodwater recedes, with warnings to stop direct consumption, boil water, or use alternatives, and test and disinfect before returning a well to service.
2.6. Not a moment too soon. Life cycle accounting gave a clear answer. A car that still runs well is not automatically the lower carbon choice. Manufacturing a new vehicle creates a concentrated upfront emission, while burning gasoline or diesel adds emissions on every trip. Climate judgment and household financial judgment are not the same, however. A relatively new car retains value, and an electric vehicle, charging equipment, and financing all cost money, so policy should not impose one replacement date on every owner. A more effective order is to replace the most fuel-hungry, highest mileage, and most intensively used vehicles first, while making sure that retired combustion vehicles are not transferred elsewhere and kept on the road. That is how the climate advantage of earlier replacement becomes a real reduction in global emissions. 2.7. NASA's Punch punches up space weather forecasts. NASA's Punch mission offered a new view that could have narrowed the predicted arrival of the same solar storm to less than half an hour. Its instruments removed about 99% of background light, revealing the faint visible light scattered by the solar wind and coronal mass ejections. The May event traveled at an average of about 1,380 kilometers per second, reached Earth after almost 30 hours, and produced a severe G4 geomagnetic storm capable of threatening satellites and infrastructure. A model using punch data placed the arrival between 5 and 5:30 in the morning Greenwich Mean Time on June 1st. That precision could give satellite operators, utilities, navigation systems, and communication systems about 8 hours to prepare, replacing a 12-hour window with a targeted half-hour estimate. Researchers stressed that this was a proof of concept based on one event. If Punch can provide reliable information about eruption size and shape, routine timing errors might fall to 2 or 3 hours. Today, enough information about the magnetic field usually arrives only 30 to 40 minutes before impact. Because Punch measures both visible light and polarization, it can observe the front of an approaching coronal mass ejection in 3 dimensions. Researchers hope to estimate the strength and direction of that magnetic field several hours before impact, but the report presented this as a goal for the next stage of modeling and validation, rather than an operational capability already in use. 2.8. Turbulent seismoacoustic imprints during a hurricane landfall. The case showed that existing seismic and infrasound networks can supplement hurricane observation. The method still needs testing across more storms, geological settings, and station configurations, but it provides a new source of continuous data from the most dangerous layer near the ground, and a way to reuse historical seismic records. Researchers examined Hurricane Isaac as it made landfall in Louisiana in 2012, using infrasound pressure records and seismic displacement from the same site. Infrasound sensors recorded pressure changes, while seismometers recorded ground motion. Both signals were strongest in the eye wall and weakened in the eye. Simulated ground movement matched the seismic record, supporting atmospheric pressure as the main source. The researchers continuously estimated turbulent dissipation and used infrasound pressure as a proxy for wind speed at a height of 10 meters. Pressure coupling information preserved in seismic data could also be used to recover near-surface wind speed and turbulence at stations that lack pressure sensors. 2.9. Turbulent sounds of landfall. The most important value of the method is continuity. Aircraft can cross a storm only intermittently, and portable towers are difficult to operate for long periods near the eye wall, whereas fixed stations can record from before landfall through the eye and the rear of the storm. Once seismoacoustic networks are included in extreme weather observation, researchers can obtain more complete time series from the most hazardous near-surface layer. The method would not replace satellites, aircraft, or weather stations, but it could fill gaps in height, location, and time that those systems cannot cover. Validation must span different storms and geological conditions. Only after ground materials, station structures, and background vibration are shown not to distort the results systematically can these signals enter operational models reliably. Validation must span different storms and geological conditions. Only after ground materials, station structures, and background vibration are shown not to distort the results systematically can these signals enter operational models reliably. 2.10. Listening to storms as they shake Earth. Seismic networks are not only tools for observing underground structure. The slight deformation that storms produce at the surface writes atmospheric turbulence into the solid Earth. Reinterpreting those signals could add evidence to modern extreme weather models and historical reconstructions. High and low pressure structures in extreme winds sweep over the ground and bend it slightly, allowing pressure sensors and seismometers to record the process together. Sorrell's theory, developed more than 50 years ago, connected ground motion with pressure structures moving above it. Many seismic records predate the satellite era. If the new interpretation proves reliable, researchers could return to old analog seismograms and search for deformations caused by early storms. Other work has recovered ocean wave microseisms from records made in 1936, and atmospheric pressure-driven ground motion could preserve a weather archive extending across decades. 2.11. What triggered the atmosphere's Great Oxygen Surge? The Great Oxidation Event is changing from a single clean turning point into a staged process that lasted roughly 200 million years. The expansion of shallow continental seas may have created the first conditions in which oxygen could accumulate over the long term, while snowball Earth and its melting ice may have produced repeated rises and falls. One new explanation focuses on continental shelves. Models indicated that oxygen accumulation could begin rapidly when ancient shelf area exceeded about 10% of the modern area. The rise was not one smooth jump. Another explanation connected repeated oxygen fluctuations with snowball Earth, allowing oxygen levels to swing through glacial and interglacial periods. Researchers are still rebuilding this history, and the evidence requires oxygen, climate, and geological change to be understood on the same timeline.
Section 3. Technology Governance, Research Institutions, and Scientific Careers. This section moves through the next Turing tests: Indian artificial intelligence sovereignty, visa costs borne by international researchers, the Fauci hearing, and changing scientific publishing. It follows how measurement, national autonomy, scientific careers, and the circulation of knowledge are rearranged when new technologies enter institutions. 3.1. The next Turing tests, reimagining conceptions and measures of AI. The next Turing tests would no longer search for one endpoint that declares a machine equal to a human. Instead, they would provide continuing methods that help society understand, choose, and revise the uses of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence now operates across more areas of science and society, so asking only whether a machine resembles a person no longer captures either its progress or its consequences. The authors proposed rebuilding evaluation around diversity, partnership, and systemicity. Diversity would replace a single ladder from low to high ability with cognitive profiles made from different capacities and tendencies. Partnership would ask not only whether machines replace people, but whether people gain new abilities after working with artificial intelligence. Systemicity would move beyond checking whether a model follows a set of values and would track the net benefits and harms of a use across society. What matters is not simply how many human tasks a machine replaces, but whether people understand problems better, preserve independent judgment, gain new experiences, or lose existing skills through long-term use. Evaluation must identify who becomes better off, who becomes worse off, and under what conditions. The authors proposed simulated social sandboxes containing different artificial intelligence profiles and virtual people with realistic behavior, where researchers could test employment displacement, educational use, medical advice, and extreme safety events. 3.2. How should India approach AI? If India combines open standards, public digital infrastructure, and its large engineering workforce, it could build a form of artificial intelligence sovereignty without reproducing every frontier computing resource. The priority is not only chips, data centers, and large language models, but the application layer above them, especially artificial intelligence agents that perform real work. Training one frontier model now approaches $1 billion, making an infrastructure race an unrealistic sole path to independent control for most countries. Open-source systems are often only months behind the strongest proprietary models and can cost orders of magnitude less to deploy. Many Indian companies already fine-tune and use open-source models, and the infrastructure may continue to become cheaper and more widely available. A deeper dependency appears when an institution encodes its core operations into foreign systems that it neither owns nor controls. Those platforms absorb not only data, but also the way the institution works. For more than a decade, India has built open digital applications and platforms known as IndiaStack for payments, biometric identification, data exchange, and commerce, serving more than 1 billion users. Sovereignty therefore means choice, portability, and control of institutional knowledge. Automation may displace part of India's engineering work, but it could also redirect engineers from maintaining foreign platforms toward building open agents and interoperable tools that local institutions can control. 3.3. The price of my future. With only 6 months remaining before the next visa renewal, the family still needed to raise almost £13,000. United Kingdom visa costs are higher than those in many countries, partly because applicants must pay, in advance, a health surcharge covering the entire visa period. For early career researchers who depend on short contracts, visa cycles and employment cycles overlap. The author listened to his daughter, imagining her future, but could not tell her that the family might not be able to remain long enough for it to happen. The child already regarded the United Kingdom as home, while her parents had to divide the future into one renewal after another. Visa calculations continued in the background, but never appeared on a curriculum vitae, in publication counts, or in performance reviews. The author wanted colleagues and institutional managers to discuss the pressure borne by international researchers more openly. Support aimed only at the principal applicant could not address the real cost carried by a spouse and children. Behind daily work, he continued calculating whether the family could stay long enough for the future his daughter had begun to imagine. 3.4. Fauci takes the fifth. After a short opening statement before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, Anthony Fauci invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and declined to answer questions. He invoked the amendment more than 100 times and did not respond to old and new accusations from Rand Paul and other Republican senators, including claims that he had helped create the pandemic or profited from it. Former President Joe Biden had issued Fauci a preemptive pardon for his conduct during the pandemic because he feared politically motivated criminal charges from a future Republican administration and Congress. Paul warned during the hearing that Fauci's refusal could bring repercussions. Holding a witness in contempt, however, requires a vote of the full Senate, and the report noted that Republicans might not have enough votes to pass such a resolution on their own. 3.5. Change comes for science publishing paradigms. The final judgment did not deny the disorder created by the Internet, but rejected the idea that every move toward openness is a step backward. Changes in publishing bring new risks of spreading error, but also the possibility of faster, wider, and fairer access to research. Debate over open access, preprints, and public search has become central to how scientific knowledge will circulate. The review acknowledged that the problems are real and that scientific publishing is at a turning point. Public papers and preprints increase visibility and make participation easier for researchers in different regions. Subscription charges may become article processing charges, so costs do not disappear automatically, but move from readers to authors or institutions. Open access, therefore, creates new questions of fairness rather than providing a completed solution.
Section 4. Materials, Chemistry, Energy, and Quantum Engineering. This section covers quantum key distribution, lithium metal anodes, analog quantum computing, thermopower in scandium nitride, room temperature levitated magnetometry, vicinal dissubstitution, and Snell mucus materials. It moves from quantum communication into batteries, thermoelectrics, magnetic sensing, organic synthesis, and biological materials, revealing new links between structure and function. 4.1. Ultra-fast quantum key distribution. Together, two studies showed that quantum key distribution is moving from customized laboratory equipment toward high-speed, integrated, and more affordable communication systems. Gigabit per second secret key generation established a new performance base for scalable quantum secure networks. Quantum key distribution allows two parties to establish a secret key through a public channel and use quantum mechanics to reveal eavesdropping. Large-scale commercial use requires security, but also sufficiently high key rates, stable devices, and scalable manufacturing. Both studies built systems based on integrated silicon photonics, compressing essential light generation, modulation, interference, and detection functions onto chip-level platforms similar to those used in existing optical networks. Secure key rates reached roughly 1 billion bits per second, far above many earlier systems, and potentially sufficient for higher throughput communications rather than only slow control messages. Speed did not come from pulse rate alone. The systems also had to control optical loss, errors, device drift, and finite key effects so that the final keys still met security conditions. Integrated silicon photonics allowed many functions to operate together inside a stable, compact structure and offered a path toward mass manufacture and network deployment. 4.2. Etching lithium for better anodes. The study presented chemical etching as a method that could fit into lithium metal battery manufacturing. Its central result was that rearranging crystal orientation improved deposition uniformity and cycling stability. Lithium metal offers very high theoretical capacity and is an important anode material for increasing battery energy density. The researchers used a simple chemical etch to reorganize ordinary lithium foil into a texture dominated by the 110 crystal orientation. The treated surface changed lithium-ion nucleation and growth, making later deposition more uniform and reducing local voids during stripping. Lithium deposited across a larger area at the same time, which suppressed dendrite formation. Treated foil showed more stable plating and stripping efficiency and maintained longer cycling in lithium iron phosphate cells. The improvement remained when the experiment used thin lithium foil and faster charging conditions closer to commercial requirements. The method adjusted the surface of existing foil directly instead of relying on complicated three-dimensional current collectors or thick protective layers. 4.3. An analog advantage. The results showed that analog quantum platforms can directly explore strongly entangled, many-body, and non-equilibrium dynamics, and can reach regions that classical computation struggles to access for specific tasks. In the reported experiment, the quantum system evolved continuously under a target Hamiltonian instead of translating every step into digital gate operations. Researchers arranged ultra-cold rubidium-87 atoms in chains and ladders in chains inside a periodically driven optical lattice. Site-resolved measurements followed the many-body states under different driving conditions and identified the phases entered by the system. The experiment measured entanglement entropy and higher-order multi-point correlations. A single average quantity may fail to distinguish complex phases, whereas these measures show how quantum information spreads and reorganizes. As atom number and structural size increased, growing entanglement made classical simulation progressively more difficult. At the largest experimental scale, existing classical methods could no longer reproduce the measured observables efficiently. 4.4. Heavily doped, highly compensated epitaxial SCN thin films exceed Boltzmann thermopower limits. Near room temperature, the films produced a negative Seebeck coefficient greater than 124 millivolts per Kelvin. That value was nearly 2 orders of magnitude above the range long considered possible for solid electronic conductors and approached the thermoelectronic response of electrolytes and ionic conductors. Charged DO-pants did not create a uniform potential. Instead, they produced large, random fluctuations across space, localizing carriers in regions separated by barriers. As temperature rose, carriers crossed those barriers through thermal activation and formed percolating paths. Only the combination of heavy doping and strong compensation made the fluctuations large enough to push electron transport into this unusual regime. The study also emphasized that electrical conductivity and noise still determine real device performance. Raising the Seebeck coefficient alone does not automatically raise conversion efficiency. 4.5. High thermal power in scandium nitride. The key to the enormous thermal power was that charge carriers no longer moved through a uniform energy band in the conventional way. Heavy doping and strong compensation together created a strongly fluctuating potential landscape, forcing electrons to hop between localized regions or cross barriers. This transport state greatly amplified the way a temperature gradient selects carriers, allowing an inorganic electronic conductor to approach the thermoelectronic response of an ionic conductor. The results suggested that traditional limits may be exceeded not only by finding new chemical compositions, but also by using controlled disorder and compensation to reshape carrier paths. A practical device would still have to address conductivity, noise, stability, and manufacturing consistency. An extremely high Seebeck coefficient represents a new material state, not an automatic increase in thermoelectric conversion efficiency.
4.6. Levitated sensor for magnetometry in ambient environment. The team built a diamagnetically stabilized magnetometer based on a levitated permanent magnet. Near its optimum operating frequency of about 305 Hz, the device reached a sensitivity of 32 femtotesla per square root Hertz. That performance was comparable with some superconducting quantum interference devices and atomic magnetometers, yet it did not require a cryogenic environment. The sensor operated at room temperature and tolerated residual background fields greater than Earth's magnetic field. Possible applications included the faint magnetic signals produced by the human heart and brain, the magnetism of chemical samples, and precision searches for dark matter and physics beyond the standard model. Different uses require different bandwidths, shielding, and spatial resolution, so the current experiment provided a general sensitivity platform rather than one finished instrument. Optimizing optical readout and the levitation frequency left additional room to reduce noise. 4.7. Ambient levitation. Room temperature operation changes the conditions under which levitated magnetometry can be used. The device does not depend on cryogenic cooling and does not have to remain in a nearly zero field environment, so it can be placed more easily near the human body, chemical samples, and ordinary laboratory equipment. Its engineering advantages come from passive stability and optical readout. Diamagnetic materials hold the magnet in position, while reflected light records tiny motion, removing the need for noisy electrical contacts around the sensing magnet. Low-frequency performance is still limited by mechanical vibration. Better isolation, improved materials, and adjustment of the levitation frequency will determine whether the approach can move from a sensitivity demonstration to stable measurement. 4.8. Vicinal dissubstitution of alkyl CX synthons via alkene radical cation generation. The reaction did not directly difunctionalize a pre-existing alkene. It generated an alkene radical cation in place from a common alkyl carbon halide substrate. This turned a material that normally undergoes one substitution into a precursor with two adjacent reactive sites, allowing two bonds to be formed in sequence and different nucleophiles to be combined modularly. The intermediate carried both radical and positive charge character and accepted the first nucleophile. A later single electron oxidation produced a benzylic carbocation, after which the second nucleophile entered and completed difunctionalization across neighboring carbon atoms. In some substrates, the halogen did not simply leave the system. It migrated from its original carbon to the adjacent position. The relocated carbon-halogen bond could then be replaced by another nucleophile, installing two different nucleophilic components in sequence. 4.9. 2-for-1 deal on halides. The reaction changed the familiar understanding that a halide can perform only one substitution. Photocatalysis first converted a saturated carbon framework into an intermediate with both radical and positive charge character, then allowed two nucleophiles to enter neighboring positions one after the other. The halogen did more than leave. It transferred electrophilic reactivity to the adjacent carbon, enabling one simple substrate to provide two consecutive bond-forming sites. This design principle broadened the use of common alkyl halides. A synthetic route could build a 1,2 di-substituted framework directly without preparing an alkene first, and could adjust the product by changing the combination of nucleophiles. 4.10. Calcium tunes snail mucus-based materials to multiple functions. Mucus is often treated as a viscous liquid, but land snails use it to create lubricating, adhesive, sealing, protective, and defensive materials. The materials contained many of the same proteins, and their differences arose mainly from protein content, hierarchical structure, processing, and the state of calcium. Total protein concentration was about 0.3% in lubricating mucus, about 0.6% in foam mucus, and as high as roughly 4% in yellow defensive mucus. In dry materials, calcium could act as a stabilizing component, or a precursor that later became more ordered calcium carbonate crystals. Adhesive films formed alternating soft and particle-reinforced layers, allowing them to support the snail's weight without cracking as readily as fully mineralized material. 4.11. Multifunctional mucus. Snail mucus demonstrates a material-efficient design. The animal does not create completely different chemical systems for lubrication, adhesion, sealing, and defense. It reuses common proteins while changing concentration, cross-linking, and processing. Amorphous calcium carbonate acts as a convertible regulator. In the wet state, it releases calcium ions and strengthens the network. After drying, it becomes particles or a mineralization precursor, allowing the same basic formulation to move among flow, elasticity, load-bearing, and hardening. This hierarchical control offers a direction for biomimetic materials. Instead of continually adding new ingredients, a small set of components can perform many functions through different spatial structures and processing conditions.
Section 5. Ecological Conservation, Agriculture, and Natural Resources. This section brings together Earth's sacrificial lands, the conservation genomics of American bison, dual histone marks in wheat defense, salamander physiology, a Jurassic forest, and olfactory moth wings. It examines how extraction and conservation management alter land, species, agriculture, and natural resources, while placing restoration inside long-term ecological relationships. 5.1. A harrowing tour of Earth's sacrificial lands. James Crawford's book, The Vanishing Earth, follows environmental tragedies caused by extracting minerals, sand, water, and oil. Its chapter on rock visits Bone Valley in Florida, a center of phosphate mining and fertilizer production. Its chapter on metals enters the salt flats of Chile's Atacama Desert, where large-scale brine extraction alters groundwater and salt lake ecosystems, placing the demands of the global low-carbon transition beside pressure on local water. The book also examines warming, coastal change, global demand for concrete, and the coexistence of efficient food production with heavy water use under vast greenhouse landscapes. The reviewer accepted that intervention is necessary, but argued that the book did not provide one framework covering the full range of extraction damage. Global plastic recycling remains below 10% and needs larger infrastructure. Mine tailings can be reused, while automation and precision mining can reduce unnecessary disturbance. International cooperation and investment in technical solutions also matter, because mineral supply chains, energy demand, and pollution cross borders. The reviewer recalled visiting Pennsylvania land densely drilled for oil in the 19th century. Its recovery showed that nature can repair itself, but not that every oil field will recover automatically. Ecological conditions, governance, and energy dependence differ by place, and readers seeking a systematic account of policy combinations, circular use, technology, and the energy transition would need other sources as well. 5.2. Genes of an Icon. American bison recovered from about 500 animals to more than 500,000 and escaped immediate extinction. But they lost the migration and gene flow that once connected them across a continent. Paleogenomics showed that recovery must restore not only head counts, but genetic links among populations and the diversity that allows future adaptation. Before the middle of the 19th century, North America may have held about 50 million bison. Today, roads, fences, farmland, and protected area boundaries block movement. Many wild herds contain fewer than 1,000 animals, close to the size researchers estimate may be needed to maintain sufficient genetic diversity and a stable breeding age structure over the long term. Gene flow, subspecies protection, and disease control therefore have to be planned together rather than treating population growth as the only goal. 5.3. Paleogenomic insight into the collapse, recovery, and management of American bison. Transfers between herds, assisted reproduction, and gene banks can maintain the movement of alleles, but managers must also control disease and respect subspecies goals. Modern conservation herds are highly differentiated, indicating that their present structure arose mainly from recent isolation rather than ancient subspecies divisions across the continent. Overall genetic diversity remained relatively stable immediately after the numerical collapse. Strong differences among modern herds developed later, through decades of genetic drift in small populations without gene flow. An ancient wood bison genome moved the estimated split between the two subspecies to about 3,000 years ago. About 67% of sampled animals showed no detectable cattle ancestry, suggesting that cattle genes are less widespread than some earlier studies had estimated. Conservation management should therefore not assume that all bison carry extensive cattle ancestry. 5.4. Dual histone marks tune wheat defense. Researchers analyzed the transcriptome of wheat during Fusarium infection and identified 3 gene clusters encoding the TAFIP peptide family. These genes carried both a repressive trimethylation mark on lysine 27 of histone H3 and an activating trimethylation mark on lysine 4 of histone H3. After infection, expression of the methyltransferase gene TASWN, which maintains the repressive mark, declined. Repression weakened, TAFIP genes were rapidly activated and peptide signals were produced. The peptides were then recognized by the corresponding leucine-rich repeat receptor kinase TAFIPR, initiating downstream immune responses. The study showed how wheat uses 2 epigenetic marks to keep defense low under ordinary conditions while retaining the ability to release an immune signal quickly when a pathogen arrives.
5.5. The Remnants of Our Destruction. Bison populations have escaped immediate extinction but remain trapped in isolated reserves. Numerical recovery conceals a slower process because small populations continue to lose alleles when they cannot exchange genes. Conservation therefore needs to move from preserving individual animals toward restoring a network. Transfers among herds, assisted reproduction, and gene banks can rebuild genetic connections, but every step must also consider disease transmission, subspecies history, and indigenous management rights. The remnants of human destruction are not only the reduced number of animals, they also include migratory relationships severed by roads, fences, and institutional boundaries. Genuine recovery requires populations to regain the ability to exchange genes and adapt. 5.6. Seemingly similar salamanders. The lungless woodland salamanders of the Appalachian Mountains include many species that look alike. They breathe through their skin and can live only in cool, moist environments, yet different species use different microclimates. Researchers compared metabolism, cold tolerance, and resistance to water loss across 30 species. These physiological traits had undergone rapid adaptive evolution and were linked to habitat temperature, rainfall, and other local conditions. Similar appearance did not mean identical ecological function. Some species tolerated colder temperatures, some reduced water loss in drier habitats, and others adapted to local climates through different metabolic levels. The study showed that adaptive radiation can remain hidden inside subtle physiological differences. 5.7. Jurassic Forest with High Productivity. Researchers investigated a Middle Jurassic Forest site at Yiwu in Xinjiang, China, and analyzed 78 mineralized conifer stumps preserved where the trees had grown. Their positions and diameters allowed the team to estimate tree density, canopy height, and above-ground biomass. Ecological models indicated that the forest's net primary productivity was about 3 times that of modern temperate conifer forests. Because the stumps remained in place, transport and redeposition introduced less uncertainty, and the forest could be reconstructed according to its actual spatial structure. Ancient conifer forests were therefore not necessarily sparse, low-productivity systems. Under the climate of its time, the Yiwu forest built high biomass and fixed carbon rapidly, providing quantitative evidence for comparisons between ancient greenhouse worlds and modern forests. 5.8. These moths smell with their wings. The hairs on tobacco hawk moth wings displayed an olfactory function not previously recorded in other insects. Microscopy revealed pores on the wing hairs, a typical feature of smell receptors. Researchers placed detached, fragile wings between 2 electrodes and passed different odor molecules across them. 2 ammonia-derived amines, pyrrolidine and piperidine, produced measurable electrical responses. These compounds occur in pungent and decaying odors and also form part of the odor mixture released by tobacco plants, the moth's preferred egg-laying sites. The researchers proposed that the wings may act as an auxiliary nose in addition to the antenna. By sensing tobacco odors, wing hairs could supplement antennal information and help the moth find suitable plants for laying eggs.
Section 6. Biomedicine, Cellular Biology, and Neural Mechanisms. This section follows the origins of skin tumors, microglial cleanup, immune treatment for Alzheimer's disease, selected neuronal transplantation, replication fork control, mitochondrial transport, cell migration, peritoneal macrophages, and navigation circuits. Across these studies, it traces regulatory mechanisms from cell identity and immune clearance to neural repair, organelle movement, and spatial navigation. 6.1. Chemically induced skin tumors arise from long-lived stem cells of the upper hair follicle. The results located the origin of chemically induced skin tumors in long-lived stem cells of the upper hair follicle rather than in the bulge, which had often been treated as the main stem cell reservoir. Tracking over time showed that most chemically induced papillomas contain descendants of LGR6 positive or LRIG1 positive lineages, while LGR5 positive or keratin 19 positive bulge stem cells contributed little. KRAS mutations also appeared and expanded in treated skin, but they rarely formed visible tumors. When researchers deleted HRAS, KRAS mutant clones expanded and produced tumors. Tumor formation, therefore, depended on the mutation, the cell of origin, and competition among clones. Many mutant clones remained in normal tissue for long periods, and only some crossed the threshold into tumors in a favorable niche and under promoting conditions. The study also showed why cancer origins must be investigated by following both cell identity and mutation. Combining lineage tracing with high-accuracy sequencing connected normal skin to the later tumor. Human skin tumors arise from different exposures, structures, and mutation combinations, but the experiment provided a method for testing origins and identified upper follicle stem cells as an important source of chemically induced tumors. Preventing their early clonal expansion or altering competition among mutant clones could become a focus of future prevention research. 6.2. Tracking skin tumor formation. Tracking tumor formation requires placing an existing lesion back onto a timeline. A mature tumor reveals which mutations survive to the end, but it rarely shows which type of cell first received them. Lineage labeling gave different stem cells in normal skin identifiable descendants, while duplex sequencing detected extremely rare mutations before a lesion appeared. Combining the two methods connected cell identity, clonal expansion, and visible tumors continuously. The same timeline pointed to an earlier intervention window. Not every cancer-driving mutation automatically forms a tumor. The cell's niche and competition among clones also matter. So prevention research can examine the moment when a mutant clone gains an expansion advantage. 6.3. Microglia on cleanup duty after stroke. Stroke leaves dead neurons, damaged myelin, and other tissue debris. Microglia, the brain's resident phagocytes, recognize and engulf this material through efferocytosis. When clearance is incomplete, inflammation and damaged myelin remain, and nerve fibers struggle to rebuild insulation. In a mouse model of experimental stroke, Dengue and colleagues found that efficient efferocytosis required the adenosine A2A receptor in microglia. Removing the receptor specifically from microglia did not change the initial size of the infarct, indicating that it did not determine acute injury. It did, however, impair later debris clearance and remyelination, and the animals recovered less well in cognition and movement. The team then placed an A2A receptor agonist inside mice cells so that it acted in the post-stroke region. Treated mice showed better myelin repair, cognition, and motor recovery. The treatment lost its effect when microglia were depleted or lacked the receptor. The results separated acute neuroprotection from recovery. The drug did not clearly shrink the initial lesion, but improved repair over the following weeks by strengthening the cleanup work of microglia. Efferocytosis and A2A signaling therefore became a possible point of intervention during post-stroke recovery. 6.4. Safe anti-PD-L1 in Alzheimer's disease. Cruz and colleagues reported the first randomized, double-blind, Phase 1b human trial of a new anti-programmed death ligand 1 antibody with a short residence time in the body, first asking whether people with early Alzheimer's disease could receive this treatment safely. Treatment was generally well tolerated, and no serious treatment-related adverse events were reported. The short half-life made immune checkpoint blockade temporary, reducing the risks that might accompany persistent immune activation. None of the dose groups showed a statistically significant overall change, so the early trial did not establish efficacy. The highest dose group showed a downward trend in a cerebrospinal fluid marker of neuronal injury, but the sample was too small to confirm the signal. 5 doses were tested in small groups. Further development will require larger samples, longer follow-up, and trials able to assess cognition and biomarker changes. 6.5. Cell type-enriched transplantation. The results show that transplantation does not depend only on the total number of cells. The exact neuronal types and their stage of maturity within the donor population also matter. By comparing cell type enrichment, single-cell identity after transplantation, and physiological recovery, the study provided a selection principle for later neural repair work. The experiments remained limited to mice and experimental injury, so human use will require more evidence on safety, long-term survival, connection specificity, and control. Researchers prepared cultures enriched in human V2A interneurons and transplanted them into the injured spinal cords of mice with damaged respiratory circuits. Cells that integrated stably came mainly from one transcriptional group. They formed synapses, responded to light stimulation, and established functional connections with the host respiratory network. Animals receiving enriched grafts recovered breathing more effectively, and the abundance of the target neurons in each graft was associated with the degree of recovery. 6.6. Anchoring CHK1 at the fork. CHK1 has often been treated as a checkpoint activated strongly after replication stress, but the new work showed that it must also operate continuously at a lower level without obvious external damage. Researchers found that the replication timing factor RIF1 and the mediator CLASPI anchored CHK1 near replication forks. This local position gave the kinase basal activity, limited the number of replication origins that started at once, and maintained fork speed. When the anchoring relationship was disrupted, too many origins fired, replication lost coordination, and cells with unfinished DNA could enter mitosis prematurely. Chromosome breakage and genomic instability then increased. Stable replication therefore depends on a checkpoint signal that is spatially restricted, low in intensity, and continuously present.
6.7. A molecular switch for coordinating kinesin and dynein transport of mitochondrial cargo. The molecular switch prevented kinesin and dynein from engaging in an uncontrolled tug-of-war. Adapter proteins regulated dynein through conformation and phosphorylation while retaining their connection to kinesin, allowing cargo to change direction rapidly when needed. Structural and functional analysis identified a dynein-regulating helix in the adapter that acted as the direction switch. When the helix opened, the dynein complex was recruited and entered persistent motion. Phosphorylation changed the adapter's conformation, released the helix, and increased dynein activity. Healthy mitochondria move toward the cell periphery to supply energy, whereas mitochondria affected by oxidative stress need to return toward the cell's center, close to lysosomes and the autophagy system. Stress signals can therefore reverse transport directly without dismantling the original motor complex. 6.8. Mitochondrial Transport. Mitochondrial transport is not a continuous tug-of-war between two motors on a microtubule. The cell preserves the ability to move in both directions, but uses the conformation of an adapter protein to give one direction an advantage at a particular moment. This arrangement allows direction to change rapidly. Healthy mitochondria travel toward peripheral regions that need energy, while stressed mitochondria turn toward the cell center and approach quality control and clearance systems. A stress signal is therefore translated directly into a logistics instruction. The cell does not have to rebuild the whole transport machine. It changes the molecular switch that connects motors with cargo. 6.9. Signaling the cell's way forward. Long-range mutual activation combined with short-range mutual inhibition allowed a small initial difference to grow into stable polarity. Protrusion at the front drove contraction at the rear, and activity at the rear supported formation of a distant front, allowing the cell to turn local sensing into whole cell movement. After researchers activated RAC locally, the front protrusion sent a signal through mTOR complex 2 and activated Rho at the opposite end. Reverse experiments showed that local Rho activity could promote RAC at a distance through phosphoinositide signaling. The front and rear were therefore connected through long-range positive feedback rather than operating as separate modules. Within the same local region, RAC and Rho inhibited one another. That local exclusion prevented opposing cytoskeletal programs from occupying the same position. 6.10. Parallel paths for peritoneal macrophages. Large peritoneal cavity macrophages are not one completely uniform population. The results showed that they form through two parallel paths. Some remain in the cavity for long periods and renew themselves, while others arise after circulating monocytes enter the abdomen and gradually acquire a similar phenotype. Cells derived from monocytes patrol mesothelial surfaces and replenish macrophages along the mesothelial boundary. They differ from other large cavity macrophages in position, gene expression, and mode of renewal. Fate tracing therefore separated superficially similar cells into distinct origins and working regions. The heterogeneity of peritoneal macrophages reflects not only molecular markers, but continuing developmental origins and replacement routes. 6.11. Adaptive modulation of theta sweeps in the brain's navigation circuit. Population decoding showed that theta sweeps do not always move forward along the direction of the body. When a target lay to the left or right, successive theta cycles could alternate between the two sides. While an animal remained temporarily still, some sweeps pointed toward one direction before the head and body turned that way. The content of the sweep was therefore linked to an upcoming choice rather than passively copying the current path of movement. Similar alternating patterns appeared during sleep, when there was no immediate visual input or real displacement. The navigation circuit could generate spatial sampling sequences internally and did not depend completely on current sensory stimulation. The flexible sweeps could support target tracking, comparison between directions, and preparation for movement. Their appearance during sleep further indicated that this generative ability belongs to the navigation network itself. 6.12. Sweeping through places. These neural sweeps resemble rapid sampling of attention more than a simple copy of the route currently being traveled. Before the animal turns its head, the navigation network can represent several possible directions in alternation. This early comparison keeps the spatial map partly independent from bodily movement. Even when the animal moves backward, remains still, or enters rapid eye movement sleep, the network continues to generate organized spatial sequences. The hippocampus and entorhinal cortex therefore do more than record places already visited. Before action begins, they select spaces related to the goal. Navigation becomes a continuously updated process of choice.
Section 7. Evolution, Human Origins, and Cognition. This section covers dietary sugar and human evolution, the preference for sweetness, a Neanderthal muscle-related variant, the visual brain hypothesis, modular evolution of the neocortex, and the origin of larger brains. It begins with food, ancient human genetics, and primate vision to examine how bodies, brains, and cognition formed through evolution. 7.1. A central role for dietary sugars in human evolution. The review focused on metabolism and argued that glucose supply occupied an important place in the expansion of the brain and the demands of reproduction. Brand Miller and colleagues modeled the requirements for protein, fat, and carbohydrate created by brain tissue, reproduction, pregnancy, and lactation across roughly 4 million years, then tested whether different food combinations could meet those constraints. As the energetic costs of the brain and reproduction rose, diets without carbohydrate became less able to provide enough glucose while remaining below the upper limit for protein intake. Glucose from carbohydrate therefore changed from a useful resource into a critical one. The authors distinguished sugars in natural foods from modern, highly refined sugar. Evolutionary history explains why people seek sweetness, but it does not mean that all sweet foods in the modern environment match ancestral conditions. As tools and cooking increased access to starch, humans could obtain glucose from more reliable plant sources. 7.2. The origins of your sweet tooth. The evolutionary background of a preference for sweetness is not the same as the modern environment of added sugar. Fruit, honey, and cooked starch available to ancestors were restricted by season, location, and processing effort, so sweetness once pointed towards scarce and valuable energy. Refined sugar is available throughout the year, is more concentrated, and is often separated from water, fiber, and intact cellular structure. A preference that once helped people find glucose can therefore drive intake far above ancestral conditions in the modern food environment. Understanding this history does not justify every sweet food. It explains why an ancient preference can become mismatched with contemporary processed food. 7.3. How Neanderthals Got Ripped. Neanderthal skeletons show that they were more robust than many modern humans, with greater musculature, wider jaws, and more prominent brow ridges. By comparing modern and ancient genomes, researchers identified a growth hormone receptor variant unique to Neanderthals that may explain part of these physical differences. The variant occurred in about 0.5% of Europeans, 2% of indigenous Americans, 15% of East Asians, and 20% of South Asians. Modern people carrying it had, on average, about 270 grams more muscle and slightly different jaw shape than people carrying the common variant. These differences came from population-level statistical comparisons and did not mean that one gene determines a whole physique. Neanderthal ancestry may continue to influence muscle mass and details of facial bone structure, not only the proportion of ancient DNA in a genome.
7.4. The Visual Brain Hypothesis. The article did not use vision to explain every form of primate cognition. Instead, it challenged attempts to compress brain evolution into one scale of intelligence or a simple expansion of the frontal lobe. Forward-facing eyes and a highly developed visual system are among the clearest primate adaptations. In the macaque neocortex, more than half of the area participates directly or indirectly in visual processing. Barton emphasized that the visual system does not reproduce a perfectly accurate world inside the brain. It guides behavior. Primate vision evolved together with dexterous hands and manipulation. Accurate sight, distance estimation, and visually guided grasping created a foundation for complex tool use. The hypothesis may therefore be extended toward a visual motor account of the brain. Social behavior, foraging ecology, tool use, and cultural transmission can still influence different regions. 7.5. Fossil evidence favors a role for vision in the modular evolution of the primate neocortex. The findings supported modular evolution of the neocortex. Different regions can change at different speeds under particular selective pressures, so an increase in total brain volume does not mean that every region expanded in the same proportion. Optic foramina, virtual endocasts, and phylogenetic analysis produced a consistent broad pattern. Overall, neocortical surface area increased from non-primate relatives to early primates. Several parallel expansions then occurred within primates, especially in tarsier and anthropoid lineages. Frontal lobe surface area followed a steadier allometric increase and did not show the same clear stages of acceleration. Enlargement of the optic foramina was associated with greater surface area in 3 non-frontal regions. Fossil evidence extended that relationship into extinct early primates, rather than relying only on correlations among living species. 7.6. Origins of a bigger brain. A larger brain did not arise because one general intelligence factor enlarged every region at the same time. Sensory, spatial, and motor systems could face selection at different evolutionary stages and expand at their own rates. This modular account shifts the question from which region represents intelligence to which functions in a particular way of life produced benefits large enough to offset the high energetic cost of brain tissue. The primate brain becomes a combination built by several systems over long periods. Vision is one major line that can be tested with skulls and fossils, but it is not the only explanation. Social behavior, foraging, hand use, and cultural transmission may have continued to reshape brain structure in other periods and lineages.
All right, we are now ready to enter today's main program. Before we do, please like, save, and share this episode. so that other people who need it can also see today's content and become better versions of themselves. Thank you. You can now use the timeline in the video description or the pinned comment to find the articles that interest you and listen to them in depth.